OMG.
What is up, Bomb Squad? Today, I have some very serious topics that I want to cover, including the Yang Mills existence and mass gap, heat death of the universe, and infinite vector dilemma. First, I'm going to start with infinite vector dilemma. It has to do with a theory that you literally can't even Google. Like, nothing comes up. I mean, you really can't find a whole lot on it. Um, I honestly didn't really learn this from the internet or college or school or anything like this. I kind of self-taught myself this with theories and obvious logic, and just paying attention in school and learning other things. Infinite vector dilemma is basically that point right there that I just drew right here inside that circle, has infinite points inside of it. How can that be? Well, that's because there's no definition of a point. All right. Fractional points are still a point as long as you denote that it's a fractional point inside the point. Each fractional point has infinite fractional points forever and ever and ever. And knowing this logic that there's infinite fractional points inside of every single vector, you have infinite vector dilemma. So when you're trying to extrapolate software and coordinates and biology and technology and things like that, you actually come into the problem where you have to do a full sweep of every possible vector. Now, the problem with that is that you still can only get omnicertainty equal to an x, which could be like 90%, right? But there is no 90%. There's actually no percent. You can never say that you have successfully x-rayed a vector. You can only have a good idea of what the vector has inside of it relative to its light emanating mass. And light emanating mass comes down to what kind of light. And that's why we have all kinds of different rays in order to see through objects and find out like what it is on the other side. We shine here, we get this there, right? Well, at the end of the day, infinite vector dilemma counters all known sources of X-ray because you do not know if they are one nanoparticle away. You can get your X to phase through, and you can solve for Y on what the vector you want to see, right? But that has to do with a lot of scalar mathematics, but you do not know you have infinite uncertainties. Basically, you have absolutely no idea if there's a random string particle. This is basically string theory. This is quantum entanglement, science. Everything's entangled. We're all getting X-rayed, that kind of stuff. You can only have a level of omnipresence, and each level of omnipresence is equal to 0% complete, always, because of infinite vector dilemma. Now, what I want to talk about big time here is combining infinite vector dilemma with something like heat death. These are two things that are not necessarily theory anymore. They're more so fact to the point of its duality. And I'll explain the duality at the end. I'll have fun with it. Heat death of the universe is actually a theory where all there is spinning particles and moving particles. Particles move forward and particles spin, right? Well, a whole bunch of them being trapped by the stars all around us give us gravity and keep us together. But the universe is ever expanding, therefore, we get to what's known as the big freeze or the big chill. Big freeze or big chill is basically all of the particles in the whole known universe are all moving away from each other. None of them are ever hitting each other ever again. And even if they do, like let's say these two eventually do, because if this goes on, they eventually hit, right? And they'll eventually hit, they'll chain react, and one day it'll be even more expanded outwards, and then there will be no particles hitting any particles. All particles, all bits of matter are all uniformly parallel moving outwards away from the central point of the universe, the heat death of the universe. Basically, we this theory is like an end game physics problem dilemma. It has to do with implosion immortality versus re-implosionism immortality. Stuff like this. Re-implosionism is like where you're constantly making an implosion and imploding itself to create life, to create mass, to create momentum, to create experience, to counter heat death of the universe. The problem with that is that you can't stop forward momentum from causing your system. There's no such thing as an infinite um, perpetual motion machine. When something is coming out into your perpetual motion machine as a value of x, it has to be contained, and because of that value x moving into your perpetual motion machine, it alters this to x plus whatever this value is right here, y for example, right? And if that happens, this perpetual motion machine does not become a perpetual motion machine anymore. Instead, it's like a explosion resistor, which slowly causes heat death of the universe instead. What we're noticing in our universe is that we're rapidly expanding at nearly the speed of light, is what some people say. Some other people don't really say that. But at the speed of light, we're potentially heat deathing. And one day, operation cannot include, and you can't host life. And infinite vector dilemma is partially at play here because you need omnipresence in order to even start to hypothesize perpetual motion machines, especially ones as big as the universe. Comes down after that is the Yang-Mills existence gap, mass gap. You need to actually be able to solve the mass gap or similar to this in order to get to you also have to have infinite vector dilemma. Some people argue the vector dilemma is not real, right? And this is me arguing with other people. Um, Here is the vector, right? And let's say this is the smallest vector ever. All you can possibly do is shoot mass into the vector or out of the vector, right? Which would be like replaced by more mass into the vector and then out of the vector, right? That's not necessarily the case. Virtual vectors mean you can shoot the mass so it's partially in the vector. So this new vector right here is a virtual vector, right? That is a virtual vector, and that's what the vector dilemma means. You zoom into that, you can actually shoot it. If you took the same exact operation, right, where you shot a particle into a particle and launched it this way, or you were using spin momentum, like let's say this one was spinning, this one was spinning, right? And your free will is somewhere within all of these spins and forward momentums. That's what's theorized by me, at least, to be where free will comes from. That's where we get our control of particles and mass, and we're able to make forward momentum and capture forward momentum with our free will. And doing so keeps us kinetically charged and alive and able to continue this. Shoot this particle forward. If you bring this back a little bit, right? Take this, move it back down here or here, right? And then it comes up in. At the end of the day, the vector becomes even smaller, right? Fractional vector. Right? Hope so. At the end of the day, you're left with this small fractional vector inside of a previous larger vector, only a part of a bigger vector that you thought was the minimum. The dilemma lasts forever and cannot be countered. Okay? Now, here's the problem: is heat death of the universe, vector dilemma, perpetual motion machine. We want to make people immortal. Like, maybe we don't want bodies to be immortal. Like, the economy could suffer, things like that. Like, there's taxes and inflation to worry about, and monopolies to worry about. Like, we want a revolving economy, and think about the universe as a video game, except it's a long-term real life video game where people are coexisting and existing, and there's like risk and reward. Like, people that are in charge and wise to these theories, like, they're going to want to be able to reuse space, reuse the theory, reuse the place over and over and over. That kind of stuff is very good logic to get your mind right. But let's assume heat death is real. Infinite vector dilemma is real, meaning nobody can contain all infinite vectors. Okay, so there are going to be free will oscillation vectors that are used that nobody can stop. It's counter Havenism. It's counter Haven code, because Haven is like a force that nothing can possibly happen. Now we get into 5D. 5D infinite vector dilemma actually supports Haven. It's completely the opposite. It's the duality. I'm kind of talking about the negative side effects, and the reason why I want to talk about the negative side effects is because I'm building up to the end, which is the counter. Right? The counter of the heat death of the universe, because it is only logical in a 4 spatial dimension universe that we live in. Right? We have 4 spatial dimensions. Right? We have 3 spatial dimensions, and then the 4th is like time. Right? We necessarily we don't live in 3D. A 3D piece is like a statue. A 4D piece is a car on the road. That's 4D. We live in a 4D space time, and in 4D logistics, we actually instantaneously die to any possible heat whatsoever, because the car will hit the air and the air will blow up the car. And it doesn't make sense to you, but to somebody that's a 5D logistics person, they understand why the car doesn't blow up. To a 4D logistical being, a being that can only think in 4 dimensions, space-time, the car will melt and warp. But in a 5D space-time universe, in a 5D logistical space-time universe, the car is a conscious being. The car, protects itself. The car is not just the car, but it's outside of the car at the same time, holding the car in, keeping it together. When the car warps from the air, it pushes itself back together. But at the end of the day, I want to get back to the heat death of the universe counter. Very, very enlightening here. At the end of the universe, there's no particles left, and you're experiencing slowly dying. Here comes God. God's here like, Illogical universe foundation. Bitches.